the drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission demanding is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of You Got Boston after the Celtics close out the Magic and advance to the next round of the playoffs. 4-1, as I predicted. Expected this to be a 5-game series, and it ended up being just that. And this game was, I think, the one that we were all waiting for this whole time. They finally blew out this Magic team. They win this one 120-89. Just a massive second half. A charge that was led by a little bit of physicality and pushing the pace by Jaylen Brown early in that third quarter, but was ultimately sealed by the Celtics finally taking and hitting threes after going 0 for 6 from 3 in the first round, which was just ridiculous. Come out in that third quarter. Like the Celtics that we've come to know and love, and it was really fun to watch. Ultimately finished that period 5 of 8 from 3, and just seeing a few fall, like this crowd was just begging for them to shoot some threes. In the fourth quarter, the Celtics shoot 8 of 10 from 3. And that's what really put this one away. Even Torrey Craig got in on the action. Baylor Shireman got in on the action. And as you guys know, I've been doing 4 encouraging things after each game. Going to do today, this one was a really easy one to do. It was even easy to do after the loss, but obviously it's easier to do after a big win like today, where there's just so much to talk about, so much to draw from. And I'm going to look a little bit at the entire series, not just game 5, because ultimately I think a lot of what we saw today was more of a trend than just an isolated thing, with the exception of them finally getting up some threes. So it's hard to know where to start. I'm going to start where I think the credit is due, and that's with Jayson Tatum, who has just had 3 monster games after going down in game 2, hurting his wrist. Going down in game 1, hurting his wrist, not playing in game 2. Which was just so unusual because we all know Tatum doesn't miss games. He doesn't miss playoff games. He's never missed a playoff game before. Him missing that game really surprised me. I didn't expect it. And then ultimately, the next 2 days later, Joe on the radio says this is a severe bone bruise. And I thought to myself, could this be something that holds him out long term? That feels like a million years ago. That was last Thursday. I'm sitting here now, early Wednesday morning. It's 2:00. I'm at TD Garden. Just finished recording our post-game show and everything. That feels like a million years ago. He said it the other night. This what he's dealing with is serious. It's clearly still bothering him. He has a bunch of tape on his wrist. It didn't seem to impact his play. He was awesome in these final 3 games. He finishes the series averaging 31.3 points per game, shooting 44.7% from the field, 36.4% from 3. And honestly, that doesn't even really tell the full story of how impactful he was, because ultimately, I think this Magic team forced him to be the guy. They took away passing lanes, the playmaking leaps that him and Jaylen Brown made this season. You really couldn't see it in this round, because that was not what the read was. The read was, you have to score. We're making you be the scorer. And he did just that. And in the final 3 games of the series, 35 plus points in each of those, 35 tonight, 37, 36 point games. This is a guy who has been in the MVP conversation for, it feels like, years now. He's had big time moments. Al Horford said it after the game, but he loves closing out series. This is when he's at his best. You could sense that, and he was at his best tonight. In that first half, they really couldn't get anything going. He was kind of single-handedly kept the team in it. He was 16 points on 6 of 9 shooting, alongside 6 assists in the first half. And the Celtics go into the half tied down by 2, but they just did not play well. I think they all knew that. But they were still in it because he found a way to keep them in it, despite the fact that he wasn't at 100%. Rebounding in the series, just kind of doing everything, defending at a high level. This was MVP stuff. This was MVP level stuff against a very elite Magic defense that did not allow him to get anything easy, that did not allow the Celtics team to get anything easy. You needed a star in the series, and Jaylen Brown obviously dealing with a lot. Tatum was that guy. And so encouraging things, he was in a little bit of a slump towards the end of the regular season. He's had a tough game 1, just 17 points. I think he shot 38% from the field in that one. Then he goes down. You're thinking to yourself, this is not going to be the playoff run that you hope for him, that he hopes for himself. And ultimately, you kind of get a very just elite version of Tatum, a version of him that you come to expect, but you don't want to take for granted. And I think you see him getting MVP chance on the road. You see him getting MVP chance at home. And I loved what he said after the game. Athletic writer Jay King asked him about whether he feels like his first series is winning the title, anything's different. And he said the season was the most relaxed and carefree that I've been in my career, understanding that we won last year when we accomplished the ultimate goal. You kind of got that monkey off your back. I think you're seeing now Tatum play at elite level of basketball, and you're seeing Tatum play at this level in part because he's not worried about proving anybody wrong. He's not constantly thinking about, I need to win the championship or else. I don't think he wants it any less, but there is a level of freedom that you do have at this point in his career, coming off the title, especially knowing that nobody has gone back-to-back in such a long time. There's no expectation for them to go back-to-back. There can't be, because obviously this is the city of winning and everybody in Boston wants them to do it and they want to do it, but I understand why he's playing more carefree. And, he showed that he can win when teams cut away the passing lanes. I think people online joke that he's a role player, that he's on a super team, that he gets carried. I think he dispelled all of those notions in these 5 games, in these 4 games that he played. Yes, there's a ton of talent on this team, but ultimately he was the guy and he carried them to victory these final 3 games and final 2 games and gave them a chance in game 3 where they really probably shouldn't have even been in that one, considering how poor they played, and especially in that third quarter. So shout out to Jayson Tatum. There's a reason why he's first team All-NBA every year. There's a reason why there are few players in the league that are in his league. And all of that was on full display in this series here versus the Orlando Magic, and against the player Paolo Banchero that has been kind of a mentee of his. Tatum's been somebody that he's looked up to. He said today they haven't talked at all during the series. Finally, he got to chat with him in the hallway after this game. But yeah, they totally were not. They were not friends in this series, and there was no love lost between these two teams. I think there was a lot of respect, but certainly some hard fouls and some dicey moments. Second thing I found encouraging is how Jaylen Brown was able to play through pain. It was very obvious that starting in game 3, Jaylen Brown was once again limited by the knee injury. He got some injections in between the regular season and the postseason. He looked really good in games 1 and 2. We heard he was looking great at training camp. There was few visible limitations in those first 2 games, and obviously game 2 was his marquee moment in this round. And when it's all said and done, Tatum, they needed somebody to step up in Tatum's absence. They didn't want to be tied 1-1 going to Orlando. We'd be in a completely different place right now if Jaylen hadn't had that monster 36-point, 10 rebound, 5 assist game. I thought in this game he did a lot of what he's kind of been doing all series long. He finishes the series averaging 23 points per game on 49.4% shooting and shooting 44.4% from 3, 84.4% from the line. He was uber efficient in this series, despite the fact that he's clearly not at 100%. Back-to-back games where in the third quarter he came out and just set the tone for this team, pushing the pace, physical, driving to the basket, kind of making Orlando pay. I asked Joe Mazzulla after the game about whether there was a point of pride in winning while not shooting threes and winning in a different way. And Joe said, we just win however we need to. It's kind of like reading a puzzle. And ultimately, I thought that Jaylen was a big part of that puzzle. Obviously, a guy that can shoot threes, and he's reduced his 3-point attempts this season, but he's comfortable around the rim. He loves the mid-range game, and I thought he set the tone for them, and he helped the Celtics get things going. In back-to-back games coming out of the gates in the second half, he looked like a different player. He struggled in the first half here. I asked him about a post-game if something changed, and he said that he did kind of feel like not himself health-wise in that first half, and he felt a lot better in that third quarter. In that third quarter, he drew that 5th foul on Paolo Banchero that kind of secured the victory. I hate to say it, but Paolo had to be sidelined with 9 minutes to go in the third quarter. Jaylen Brown had an and one layup that they even reviewed. Orlando challenged that play. They reviewed it, and they upheld the call, and Paolo was charged with a defensive foul. But getting that guy in foul trouble was monumental, because ultimately Orlando just doesn't have the margin of error of losing their guy for that long, not with Jalen Suggs and Mo Wagner sidelined, not with the lack of offensive options that they have on this team. Jaylen, second half of this game, shoots 5 of 8 from the field. He ultimately, just had back-to-back big through third quarters, and was a massive part of both of these wins. And I thought Joe Mazzulla said it afterwards, defensively, he was able to be impactful in the series. He wasn't impactful defensively down the stretch of the regular season. And I think there were a lot of questions around how he was going to be able to compete. This guy is a competitor. This guy's a guy who, there's a reason why he's achieved everything that he's been able to achieve in his career. There's a reason why he is now, he's won 17 playoff series as a Celtic. He was asked about that post game, and he kind of talked about how, he doesn't take that for granted, and he knows it's all about winning in Boston, and winning the first round doesn't do anything for him. You got to win more than that. But I think if anything, his performance was inspiring in this round, because he clearly wasn't himself. And then you look at his splits and you look at what he was able to do the one game where they really, really needed him when Tatum was sidelined. And he was able to kind of will his way to make an impact. And there were some ugly moments. There were some ugly turnovers. There was moments where you saw him have a driving lane and he just didn't have the explosion, the lift that he normally has. And it was hard to watch because, like, you know what a healthy Jaylen looks like. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows he's not playing nearly at 100%. The question is, what is a 60% Jaylen Brown? What is a 50% Jaylen Brown? I think that's a really good basketball player ultimately, because he has this warrior mindset. He has this competitive edge. He has this thing that makes him so impactful, such an NBA, great NBA player, somebody that has limited so many star players in different series. And again, I think that if you're a Celtics fan, you walk away from the series saying, hey, he's not healthy. Clearly, he's not 100% himself, but he found a way to still be impactful. And I think this time off is going to be great for him. It's going to be great for Tatum, dealing with the wrist injury. 3 days off at the very minimum. I don't think they can play game 1 before Saturday. New York did not close things out today, so a little bit more time there. But despite that, again, you look at the numbers, you look at his impact, you look at what he was able to do. I thought the game that they lost, part of why they lost that game is because they didn't have him on the court down the stretch because he was in foul trouble. So there's no question. I threw out this question towards the end of the regular season of, like, is there a world where Jaylen Brown is more of a net negative than a net positive with his knee injury, and that it's going to be kind of creating an uncomfortable conversation of, like, does Joe need to bench him because he's such a liability? And that seems so far away from where we're at right now. In no way, shape, or form was he a minus for them in this series. He was without a doubt an asset for them, and it wasn't always perfect. But I think you have to appreciate and respect how he was able to kind of push through. And he comes out of the court today. He's clearly hobbled in warm-ups. He has a big giant wrap on his knee. After the game, he dislocated his finger in game 3, so he had a massive wrap on his hand today after in the locker room. Like, he's just so banged up, and I think he's just had a year where he's dealt with more injuries than ever before, and found a way to compete.
Game Time is the best way to buy tickets to basketball games, to concerts, all sporting events. We're in the middle of the NBA playoffs. There's no better way to look through tickets for games. Download Game Time, look through the ticket options. You can see how much tickets cost for the game. You can see what the seat view is going to look like, so you don't have to worry about, like, getting a seat that's obstructed or you're behind the basket. You can actually look exactly at the seat from the point of view. And my favorite part of Game Time is that there is no extra fees at the end. So I can look at the prices. I can see right now it's about $150 for game 1. That's that. There's not going to be any hidden fees, taxes, anything like that. That is the final price that you pay, and therefore you can ensure that you're getting the best deal. There is a lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And there's all-in pricing. Game ticket coverage ensures that your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. I've literally used Game Time for any purchasing need that I've had over the last couple of years of my life. Every time I buy somebody a gift, I use Game Time. And right now, you can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
So it's going to be hard to limit things to 4 things ultimately, because I do think that you walk away from a 5-game series and against a really competitive, elite defensive, Magic team. There's a lot to like, but there were some questions around the Celtics bench. They definitely struggled earlier on. Tonight they were really good. Sam Hauser had his best game of the series. He hits all 4 of his shots. He had 10 points in this game, and he was really a big part of that run in the third quarter to kind of open up this game and blow things open. Ultimately, he was efficient. Like, it wasn't like he was in a slump. He shot 54.5% in the series. So same thing with Pritchard. It's like, it wasn't about the fact that they were slumping. It was about the fact that they couldn't create separation and they couldn't get shots up. And I think it had less to do about them and more about what the reads were in this team. And talked to Pritchard after the game in the locker room, and he was saying, like, it doesn't, it depends on like what is the option for this team. Like, it wasn't hard for him to still be impactful and to still stay locked in, despite the fact that he didn't, in games 3 and 4, like, he was not a factor offensively, but he still played some elite defense, and the numbers back it up. And Bobby and I have a story on Celtics blog coming out about that, probably already out by the time that you listen to this episode. Then defensively, he was awesome. I think the question is offensively, what kind of the situation was. You look at his numbers. I'm just going to read what the totals averages here were for him. He averaged 9.2 points per game, shot 51.6% from the field, 50% from 3. He had a 19-point game. He had a 14-point game too. at the end of the day, like, you will take that, and you kind of have to take that because this is a team that tried to take him away as much as possible. He still scored in the double figures in 3 of the 5 games, had 10 points on 4 of 8 shooting tonight. But honestly, forget the offense, because the offense is great and it's what made him 6th man of the year. And I think everybody knows that he's a scorer and he's a shooter. And he found ways to score at the rim this year and scored in the mid-range. It was the defense. It really was. And the task was tall with Jrue Holiday sidelines for games 3, 4, and 5. Before the game, I asked Jamal Mosley, like, how different is game planning for the Celtics with Payton Pritchard, with Jrue Holiday sidelined. And Jamal Mosley, on his own, brought up Pritchard as a guy who's kind of stepped in and done defensively a lot of similar things to what Jrue does. And it's not at the same level. Jrue Holiday is elite. I think he remains one of the most underrated players in the NBA. I think he remains one of the most underrated players in his fan base. And maybe these 3 games without him have kind of opened up people's eyes to better realize like how dependent the Celtics are on him, like how different they are without him. So the question people were wondering when Jrue's out, is Baylor Shireman going to see minutes? Is Torrey Craig going to see minutes? Who's going to carry the load? And the answer was Pritchard got those minutes. And I thought defensively he was phenomenal. It was very obvious early on that Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero were hunting him and that they thought they had an advantage in those matchups. And they didn't. And at a certain point, you could sense that they no longer were trying to go at him because there was no advantage. There was not. His center of gravity is low. He's strong. He's tactical. He knows what he's doing. And so that was one of my biggest takeaways. I think just in general, his defense was a question mark. And you saw that it's just teams can try to exploit it. They're just going to hurt themselves. This is not the same guy that he was 3 years ago. I think that, yes, he's shorter, and that's something that he's never going to be able to change, but he's managed to find ways he's just not a liability out there. And the NBA is all about hunting the weakest defender these days. That's what the Celtics do better than anybody. That's why they struggled offensively at times in this Magic series, because the Magic don't really have a guy you can pick on. Sometimes Cole Anthony was out there, but for the most part, like, they don't really have a player like that. And Celtics don't either, because Pritchard is not that guy. And maybe in the past he was, but he's not. And that's a massive, massive takeaway I have from him in the series. I don't have too many concerns about the fact that he was not much of a factor in games 3 and 4 offensively. Some of it was probably he could have been a little more aggressive. Some of it was Orlando's defense. But ultimately, you look at he scored in double figures on a very high efficiency, 50% from the field, 50% from 3. In 3 out of the 5 games, he was able to get there. I thought that he was really good, and that's a great thing. And in general, the bench tonight was really good. This was by far the best bench game. Bench in this game. Let's look at the final numbers here. Pritchard was 4 of 8 shooting for 10 points. Hauser was 4 of 4. Luke was 3 of 3. And then even Baylor and Torrey came in and hit their only 3-point attempts. Mimi came in and it went 2 of 2 from the field. So the bench was awesome. It took them a little while to get going. I've talked about this before, but I think with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, like, they have so much playoff experience that there's just no question around, like, can they meet the moment? Do they understand the adjustments that you have to make in the playoffs to deal with the physicality? Like, they are experts in this at this point. Jaylen Brown just won his 17th playoff series as a Celtic. Like, that is insane. Jayson Tatum the other day became the 7th player in NBA history to win 70 playoff games by the age of 27. Like, they are veterans. And I think Celtics fans know that because we remember all the battles, all the Eastern Conference finals, the 2 finals appearances. But not everybody on this team is a playoff veteran. The guys that are, you can tell from the jump, they had 0 adjustment period. Al Horford had no adjustment period in the series. But the bench guys, they're much more limited. Hauser had a pretty substantial run last year in the playoffs. Like, I think he's somebody that does have that experience. Pritchard had pretty limited minutes throughout. Like, people forget because they have those massive moments in the finals where he hit the heaves and everything. But ultimately, like, he played very few minutes in some of those games. That game, the heat, that was the only time he played, right? So I think this is a little bit of an adjustment period for them and against a very good defense, right? Like, it's not like the first round could have been against the Hawks. And I don't think there would have been much of a learning curve, and they probably wouldn't have learned nearly as much. So they learned a lot. It was well worth it. And I think ultimately you have to feel good about the fact that they all kind of found a rhythm in the last game here. And that's what you wanted. You wanted them to win this game. You didn't want to go back to Orlando. You did not want that to add that miles. You didn't want to add the physical wear and tear. Not to mention you can lose that game, right? Now you're talking about a game 7. Like, nobody wants that. And they were a big part of kind of closing this out. And I thought in particular the defensive side of Pritchard was the thing that stood out to me. It's why I was right about it. It's why I talked to him about it after the game. I find the whole thing with his defense really interesting because it's the big knock on him, and because he's an undersized guard, like that's always going to be the knock on him. And I genuinely just don't think that's a thing anymore. And I know fans are always watching that stuff. You're watching Hauser, and you start to see guys getting hunted, and it changes your perception of things. But you can look at the advanced analytics, like he held up, and it is not an isolated thing. He's been doing it all year. He really has. And I spoke to him right after the Thunder game, and that was one of the things he said. Like, I have pride in those moments. Like, I want to be the guy that you put on the best player. Like, I'm not a guy you punch. Like, I'm the guy that you want to put on the best player, and I think you saw that. Final thing that stood out, and I might do a fifth because this was a fun game, and it was finally a classic Celtics, traditional victory where you kind of saw everything come together. But the 3-point shot finally fell in this game in a massive way. I mentioned that they ultimately shot 13 of 24 from three. They attempted 18 in the second half, just 6 in the first half. That was wild to see. But they shot well in the series. It wasn't that they didn't shoot well. They couldn't get them up. So as far as people being in slumps, like nobody's in a slump. They just couldn't get those looks. And a couple guys shot really well, like Hauser, Pritchard, Jaylen. Like they shot above their averages. Tatum found a rhythm. He's now 36% from the series. So it's like, that's, good for him. So the main thing, though, is that there's always this question with this team of like, are they 3-point merchants, right? Are they only good because they shoot threes? This is Missoula ball. Like if you take away the three, they can't win. And on one hand, I think if you watch the series, there were moments where the offense was uncomfortable to look at, and it seemed like, okay, they just have the Celtics all figured out. On the other hand, they blew out the Magic in 2 out of the 4 wins. Like they had a 17-point win in game 1. They won by 31 tonight. So it's like you can say what you want to say, but it's really hard to win in the NBA. It's really hard to win against good teams. If you look around the league, like the only teams that really dominated in the first round were Oklahoma City and Cleveland, both great teams, but also teams that were playing against really weak opponents, in Memphis that hadn't beat a plus 500 team in months, and Miami that looked like they didn't even want to be there. So to blow out the Magic in 2 out of the 4 games, to win in 5, they had multiple guys step up in big moments. Derek White had his 30-point game in game 1. Brown had 36 in game 2. Tatum with 35 plus points in the final 3 games. Like the offense wasn't great, and it was more of an ugly watch than actually being bad. I asked Joe about it, but he's, the free throw rates were up, the drive rates were way up. They just won in a different way. And I think ultimately you can look at it and say like Orlando figured them out and they figured out how to prevent them from shooting threes. And that's true, like they did, but it was also the Celtics doing something else instead. It wasn't like the Celtics were like, had nothing to do. Like, yes, there was that 11-point third quarter in game 3. I will probably never forget it because it was like the most unrecognizable Celtics basketball I've ever seen since I started covering this team last year. But ultimately, you'll take wins how you can get them. And I think that they showed that they're not just a 3-point shooting team, that they can win in other ways. And it's a good thing for them long term. I said this last year. I wanted them to face Miami in the first round because I wanted them to show that they overcame their demons. They beat this Miami Heat team that eliminated them 2 years. And that they were equipped for a long and grueling playoff run. It ended up being that they never were really challenged all that much in last year's playoffs. This year, I didn't have the same desire for them to have a really tough first round because I felt like they already had the confidence. They didn't really need that test. And if anything, they needed a team that wasn't going to beat them up anymore. So in that sense, like this was a tough series because definitely you walk away more injured than you came into it. But forget that. Like they learned they can win in another way. They have the data to show it. Teams can try to copy what Orlando did. I don't think that they're going to because A, they don't have the personnel, and B, it didn't actually really work. Like Orlando did it as well as possible, and still, like I said, they win in 5 games. Like this really wasn't that close of a series, and it felt like it at times. And I think especially after game 3, like it's never fun to lose a playoff game. And there's always this feeling of like what's going to happen next. Like it was tied 1-1 last year versus Cleveland. It was tied 1-1 versus Miami, but that's not winning in 5 games. You kind of crushed them. You dominated them in this series. And I'm sure Magic fans don't feel that way necessarily because they were some impressive things. And I thought Powell and Franz were both great and had some great moments. And they definitely exceeded my expectations. But ultimately, like, I think you have to kind of keep things in context. And the context was that they were able to completely change their offensive style, drive to the basket, have to beat their individual matchups against really elite defenders. Like Jaylen Brown is beating the guy who's defending him, despite the fact that he's playing on one leg in a way. Jayson Tatum, also dealing with a bunch of different things, has the best defender on the court on him, beat his defender multiple occasions. So it's encouraging. You have to look at it that way. I think you could look at it in a different way, and you can. I'm sure some people are going to say on the radio, like, oh, like, they were able to shut out the 3-pointers. Like other teams are going to copy it. I don't think other teams are going to be able to copy it, and if they are, we saw they just switched another style of play. And that's what you want. I think all season long, the Celtics had different identities. They won in all different ways. It was a big talking point for Joe Mazzulla that they don't have to win by shooting threes. They can win by attacking, by double big, by different things. And you saw all of that in this series. And it wasn't all perfect. Kristaps Porzingis, I think, had a tough round. Certainly, I think the fact that you didn't get much from your bench in a few of these games is something to just watch moving forward. But the positives far outweighed the negatives. I did a little thing on Derek White last game. I thought that he was just really so solid in the series. So shout out to him. Shout out to Al Horford, who, again, I also talked more extensively about after game 4. But just you can see the playoff experience on him. You can see the competitive edge. And he had another big game today. Offensively, just a quiet 9 points and 4 or 5 shooting. It actually wasn't quiet. I thought that he hit some really big ones. He had 4 or 5 shooting, and he had 1-1 from 3, but he had 2 really deep 2s that felt like 3s. That I think he was just over the line, but he kind of got them going offensively in moments. There was a play that Jaylen found Al for a 3 that Joe Mazzulla pointed to. It was kind of a moment that really kind of shaped, got the run started. 6 rebounds, 4 assists for him. He was a plus 28 in this game. Tatum was a plus 34. You saw this guy compete like it was, I hate to do the 38-year-old things. I'm not going to do it. Forget the age. This is one of the most reliable forward centers in the NBA. There are a few guys in his position that I would rather have on my team, especially on this roster where you have so many scoring threats where you don't need a guy to go one-on-one. He's the perfect connector for this team. He seamlessly stepped into the starting lineup. So I guess this is number 5. I wasn't going to do the whole Al thing, but it's hard not to. It really is. With Jrue Holiday out, there was never a question of who do you put in that starting lineup? It's Al, right? Al should be in the starting lineup anyways. You want to have 6 people in your starting lineup because of how good he is when he sets the tone from the jump. So overall, people are going to remember the tough moments in the series. They're going to remember the hard fouls, the physicality. Jaylen Brown saying after game 3, maybe we need to fight it out. But in totality, this was another series that the Celtics dominated in 5. And I think it's hard to grasp that it's been now 5 consecutive playoff series that they've won in 5 games. Since I started covering this team, I have never had to go back to a city for a game 6. That is kind of wild when you think about it. So they just dominate these teams. I'm going to keep picking Celtics in 5 against most of these teams because that is what history has shown me ends up happening, right? They swept the Pacers last year. Other than that, they beat everybody in 5 games. The Mavericks, the Cavs, the Heat, the Magic team. I'll tip my cap off to them. They were great. They were better than I expected defensively. They do some things really beautifully. The fact that they stick to the one-on-one matchups, it does change the pace of things. It does change what the Celtics are able to do. I mentioned this before. Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero both exceeded my expectations, especially Franz Wagner, who I honestly did not realize how good he was. He's better than I realized. If the 3-point shot comes around, I get why people have talked about him so highly. But above all that, I think you have to kind of recognize that the Celtics team ultimately look like the defending champs, and the Magic didn't really have a good chance here. It was a tough draw for them, but they probably should not have been a 7th seed. I think if they had been healthier this season, they would have been a better seed, and they wouldn't have had to see the Celtics in the first round. They want to get out of that first round. It's 2 years in a row they haven't been able to. But ultimately, I think for Celtics fan, you got to keep things in perspective here. And they did kind of dominate this matchup, but it sounds weird to say because it didn't always feel like it. But if you look at it in the big picture, that's kind of what happened here. So shout out to Jayson Tatum, who had an MVP level series. Shout out to Jaylen Brown, who upped his efficiency from the regular season to the playoffs pretty substantially, despite the fact that he's clearly not himself athletically. He's not at 100%. Shout out to Derek White, who, when they needed him, he was available. Tonight, he had a quiet night offensively, 5 points and 2 of 6 shooting, which is also a shout out because he doesn't, just because he's a guy that can score 30 doesn't mean that he has to be that guy. He showed that he can impact the game in different ways, and he was able to do that today, and he's able to take a back seat if they need him to. And other guys kind of had it going today, and that was fine. So lots to like, lots to be excited about. I'll have more coverage on Celtics blog where you can kind of read some of my stories from Game 5. I have something up on Jaylen and kind of him pushing through the knee, something on Pritchard and his defense. You can watch all of our post-game coverage, all of the interviews. They're all up on CLNS. Really appreciate everybody for watching, for reading, all that stuff. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. You Got Boston podcast. Maybe you're watching this on my YouTube channel. If you're watching this on CLNS Media. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also subscribe to CLNS Media. This podcast appears on 2 streams, but if you turn on the notifications on my channel, you won't miss any episodes. Drop any of your thoughts. I'm curious what you guys all thought, so drop your thoughts in the comment sections. How you feel about the series, how you feel about the Celtics team after 5 games. My biggest question is Drew Holiday's health. Always is, just we don't have a lot of information about it. But I think this team has a margin of error. They've shown us all year that they're able to win games even when they're not at 100% full strength. So thank you as always for watching. Enjoy these couple of days off. I know I certainly will. Lots more to read, write, and discuss. And thanks as always, and have a good night.